I have one word that I think encapsulates this episode, and I think encapsulates this journey that we're about to take, and that's the word courage.
Courage. I was going to say courage.
I was also thinking courage. That was actually, yeah.
It takes courage to record this podcast.
And it will take courage to listen to it.
It'll take courage to listen to it too, as well.
or bribery, one or the other. Yeah.
I opened the first word of the introduction of this book, and I laughed for a good 60 seconds. I thought it was so funny to open with that. It takes courage.
It took courage.
Can you imagine, like, an author, like, patting themselves on the back in the first sentence? It took courage to write this book. Just so you all know.
I texted Phil. I was like, this feels familiar. Why does this feel so weirdly familiar? Like, have you read In the Mountains of Madness by H.P. Lovecraft?
Yeah.
It's like the same thing. It's written by, this writing style, it's written by a guy who's like, I am scared to impart this knowledge to the people of the earth, but I feel it is my duty so that you must avoid the mountains of madness. And it's like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And then it gets into the primitive culture racism, and the parallels are only further accentuated.
Honestly, Lovecraft could have written this. This could be a last Lovecraft book.
At least Lovecraft had the humility to say, if I stared this thing in the eyes, it would turn my brain into scrambled eggs. This guy, it's like, I'm the only one with the greatness of mind to bring this to you. He had to rewrite the book at least 4 times because the masturbation kept ruining the pages. It just... that's the courage. That's the courage.
The courage it takes to continue writing.
To clean up and start over.
Yeah.
It just... Listen to Pixel-Lit.
Yeah.
He hasn't even introduced the show yet.
So, hi, everyone. If you are used to listening to It's Probably Not Aliens, this is a very special episode. Tristan, who is usually here with me, my name is Scott. I'm one of the regular people. Tristan is off doing his own thing right now. He's at, I think, VidCon, hanging with folks. I'm too busy. I'm too busy reading this book to go to VidCon.
You're doing the hard work, Scott.
Yeah, so I brought some of my favorite people on the internet. You may have recognized Kevin's voice already because Kevin's been on a couple episodes of this podcast, but we also have his co-host, Phil, from the podcast Pixel-Lit. Hello, you two.
Hi, Scott. Longtime listener, first-time caller.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I love when I get to do guest episodes without Tristan. It feels like the teacher has left the room and I get to, we get to just have fun.
You just throw balls of paper across the room and I love it.
And learning nothing.
Yeah.
Learn nothing.
That's exactly. So when I knew I was going to fill this episode, like, first choice was you two, because you're number one, just your podcast is very good and very funny and very fun to listen to. And if people don't know, can you explain what Pixel-Lit is about?
Sure. Yes. So Pixel-Lit is we read, recap, and review video game novelizations and tie-ins. So that could be anything from, we've read a book on Dead Space, we've read books on Halo, but we've even read books that were adaptations of the video game Eco.
Oh.
This high art video game actually had a book novelization. Varying quality, but always fun.
Always fun. Always fun. Yeah, we talk a lot about adaptation and how things, how it compares to the video game itself, the source material, and whether or not it was even worth doing the adaptation. And it's a niche topic, but we're still doing it 2 years later. So
yeah,
we have a good time.
And perfectly in time with this episode, our series, we just started recording a series on XCOM UFO Defense.
Oh, nice.
That famously was based on a lot of stuff that was based on Chariots of the Gods.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That's cool. I never played the game. I know a lot of my friends in college played it.
Yeah.
It seemed fun. I think it's popular. It's a popular game, right?
It's popular.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. it's
the
a big
kids
deal.
love it.
The kids can't get enough of it.
They can't get enough.
I play like one game a year. I don't have time for VidCon. I have very little time for video games. I wish I had more time. They seem fun. People seem to like them, those video games.
The kids and their games.
Avoid gamers at all costs.
Yes.
Just games, no gamers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just games, no gamers.
Perfect.
That's the official Pixelit motto.
Yeah.
Take your game into a hibernation chamber, lock all the doors, close the windows, don't even speak to your cat, and enjoy.
Don't tweet.
No,
definitely don't
tweets.
do that. Ooh, no. But I thought you two, I thought a fun idea for an episode to have you two on would be to cover the book that started it all, at least a couple chapters. So we're going to be talking about, this is a book club right now. This is a book club. And we read the first couple chapters of Chariots of the Gods by Erich von Däniken.
Oh, man.
And as the man says right at the start, it takes courage to read this book. It really does.
And a bloated sense of self.
Yeah.
I mean, this is exciting because when you mentioned what we were going to be reading, I was like, oh, we're doing like foundational text.
Yeah,
like
this is canonical text for ancient aliens and ancient astronaut theory.
This is it.
This is it.
I
was excited. I was like, this is a fun idea. In the first couple chapters, it touches on a lot of the stuff that Tristan and I have talked about in previous episodes of this podcast. You know, it talks about the Nazca lines. It talks about the Baghdad battery, stuff like that. But it's fun to sort of see where it all started, especially because like the first 1 to 2 chapters is like sort of painting a picture that's like, okay, I sort of get what he's going at here. And then once you hit like chapter 3, it really gets into like, I don't know, man, this is like, you're saying a lot of stuff that is really wacky.
Yeah. Because he starts out in this introduction talking about like, I am the most courageous man in the world. And I would like to thank other courageous scientists, including, and he's like name dropping. Like,
and he just, and he
like,
says something
my buddy
like,
Werner von Braun, he really hooked me up with the NASA archives.
Shout out to him.
Yeah, and everyone in the room's going, okay. Cool.
So it's amazing.
So what can I ask? I would love to, I want to dive into this book a little bit deeper, but I would love to ask, what is your, I guess, relationship or history, if any, to ancient aliens or this idea of ancient astronaut theory? I mean, because this book came out when?
1967?
Yeah, like about 60 years ago almost.
Oh, God, yeah.
Did either of you had people who read this book, or at least or knew about the show or anything like that? I mean, the show's been going on for forever. It's a huge hit. So, yeah.
Well, I grew up as a cryptozoology nerd.
Cool.
As a kid, I was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster and Champ and all that stuff. I loved all of that stuff.
Flatwoods Monster right over your shoulder.
Yeah, right over my shoulder. I went to the Flatwoods Museum in West Virginia, and I love that stuff, and that kind of naturally leads you to UFOlogy stuff, and especially because I was I'm an old man, and I was raised without the internet, and so you'd have to go to your local library or whatever, and when the novelty Sasquatch books and Mothman books were out, you'd naturally just kind of go to the next spot over and there would be some UFO stuff. And so I naturally got into that a little bit. But the ancient astronaut stuff was something that it was always just kind of, even for a cryptozoology nerd, that stuff was like conspiracy theory hat for me. So I tended to avoid it. Yeah. So I don't have a lot of background, but I do remember people talking about Chariots of the Gods and stuff like that. But this is my first time reading it.
Same. I think I might have seen, Ancient Aliens once before. And I think the thing that I remember most clearly that kind of gets to it is, do you remember when Fox was like, oh, we have the tapes of the alien autopsy?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it was like late 90s or something like that. Might as well have been just like a fucking X-Files promo.
Yeah,
it's true.
It wasn't. It was like you're looking at it, it's like, that's
about the level of scientific gravity that they gave it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I wonder if the alien will have boobs. Like, it was.
And there is a part of the first, like, I think chapter 2 or something that talks about how, like, inevitably aliens will find women to breed with or whatever. Like, he's painting the picture, like, if us in the future, and I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but if us in the future travel to other planets, they will see us as gods, theoretically. And the first thing that we are going to do is seek out women that we can, like, breed with quote unquote. and like, I mean, he might be onto something there, but like,
yeah, I mean, I put the quote down. A few specially selected women would be fertilized by the astronauts. Thus, a new race would arise that skipped a stage in natural evolution.
The clinical way of him writing that is just so unsettling to me.
I wrote right next to it was, Eric is doing an alien eugenics.
Yep. Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
No, that was the part where, because up until that, it was the first chapter, I think, aside from the ego stroking, is very, come on now, like, surely there has to be life in the universe that isn't us. And it's actually, you're like, yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, sure. And maybe in the 60s, this wasn't, I think most people, unless they have religious tendencies towards it or something, you ask them, like, with how big the universe is, we're not the only people around, right? But, I think but maybe it's different in the 60s, maybe. So you start, you're like, okay, well, this isn't nuts. He's not saying anything crazy just yet. And then he gets, it's kind of like if you're learning how to farm or something like that. It's like it's a thought experiment. And he's like, well, we would do this and this would happen. And it's like you're learning how to farm. And he's like, okay, so if we were farmers, we would get out on the ranch here and you've got, and the animals look up to us. We feed them. They see us almost as gods. And so you're going to fuck a few pigs. And that's going to happen. You're like, wait.
Naturally, that's where you're going to go. We all know this.
We all know this, and you're going to give birth to some really heinous pig-man hybrid that have skipped the next level of evolutionary change. And that's just what we're all gonna do, obviously.
That's just nature. Yeah. It's like, hold on, wait. You're talking about a completely different species.
Right.
And your first thought is, well, naturally, we're all gonna fuck each other, right?
That's just, let's be real here.
Let's be real.
Yeah.
Eric understands the assignment.
Yeah.
He knows human nature. That's a fact.
That whole section though, I wrote down that he's basically he's like the Ben Shapiro of making up space shit. Because every sentence was like, let's say, let's assume, let's venture. And I just couldn't, all I had in my head was Ben Shapiro going, no, let's just say. Let's just say.
Say for the sake of argument, like,
for the sake of argument.
Yeah.
And so if you go down and you're not gonna fuck the alien life, I don't believe it. I don't believe it.
Yeah.
I don't believe you. That's intellectually dishonest.
It's human nature. It's natural.
Yeah.
And like, okay, so
I didn't know this was going to go this direction.
No, I led us there from the get-go because that was the turning point for me where I was like, now we're getting into some weird territory. Because like you're right, chapter 1 really does just start with this big question of like, are there other intelligent beings in the universe somewhere?
Right.
And this is something that Tristan and I have talked about in the first 2 episodes of this podcast, was discussing this question of like, what are the thoughts about it? What's the research on it? Anything like that. And it's really easy to get into, because I believe it too. I'm like, the universe is so big, there's got to be something.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
I personally just don't think we've definitively found anything yet, but I want to believe there's something out there.
Yeah, I used to have the poster. I want to believe.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think, but the problem that you run into immediately with this is I don't think anybody reading this who is, thinking in terms of the universe and the galaxies and everything like that is going to just go, no, surely not. I don't think anyone, it's the conclusion he comes to after that.
Yes.
That's so still very anthrocentric, if you will, where it's just this feeling of like, he still thinks in terms of alien life forms even though he's like, well, why do we, they might not need oxygen. They might not need this, but you can tell he's still thinking in terms of like, but we could fuck, but
right. Yeah.
There's a way better chance that if there is alien life out there, it takes a shape that is nothing that we can recognize.
You're exactly right. Because he starts talking about how, like, there are certain bacteria that can exist in different places or different conditions. Like, we don't need it to be exactly like human life to survive. So we can look on other planets that might not look like Earth. But then, yeah, he does immediately come back down to like, but also we're
looking for humans.
Yeah, we're looking for human-like beings, for sure. But yeah, and I think that's sort of like, it's like tricky what he's doing, because he starts with this question that I think a lot of people, even if they don't agree with the idea that there is life out there, I think a lot of people at least could get on board with the idea that there could be,
Yes,
and so
absolutely.
I think that's what the first chapter is doing. And in that regard, it almost sets up this book to be a little boring at first, I felt like.
Yeah.
It's so mathematical in the first two chapters and I think that's another way of trying to present Erich von Däniken as a credible source.
Yeah.
And I was talking to Kevin about this before we were recording, but I was reading the PDF that I sent you, as well as listening to the audiobook that is, I think, more updated than this PDF. And during the math sections in the first two chapters, it is drastically different in the modern one versus the previous, I guess, like first iteration of the book. And I think it's just because there's just updated information and they're trying to go back, which like good on them for at least trying to all right, here's the more accurate information.
Yeah.
And Kevin, you were telling me about this. I didn't realize that the word billion just wasn't used a lot in like 50 to 60 years ago, because Erich von Däniken does use the word like 4,000 million, and then the audiobook uses 4 billion, which are the same number. But it's just, I've never heard someone say 4,000 million before.
That's funny. Oh, that's really funny.
There's another word I pointed out to Scott that he uses, which is milliard, which is the word that was used prior to billion.
Oh.
So 2 milliard is like, it means 2,000 million or 2 billion. And I think that we should call billionaires milliardaires.
I'm just gonna call them milliards.
Milliards.
Yeah.
Look at that milliard over there with his suspenders.
It's just
and top
goofier.
hat.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
But like, so it's a little dry. I don't know. Did you guys feel it was a little dry the first like chapter or two?
Yeah. I think he's trying to hook us in. I think he's doing what all good cult leaders do, and they make it seem, almost banal what they're talking about. Oh, this is so come on, no, I'm just a little old question person. I got my question pants on.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious. I'm just a curious little cat with my saucer of milk. Look at me. And chapter 3 just goes, ah!
Yeah.
Just like, let's the whole thing out of the bag. And I think he may have jumped the gun by a chapter or two. I think we needed 1 or 2 more dry chapters.
It is so, because even you look at the amount of like the length that each chapter takes up. So first chapter is just asking the question, could there be intelligent life out there? The answer, maybe. And then chapter 2 is like painting the picture of like, all right, let's put ourselves as the space explorers. And this is what would happen if we went out and we found intelligent life that was maybe not as technologically advanced as us. And they might view our more advanced technology as like magic, as like, they are gods from the heavens coming down. Exactly.
And people like Asimov were saying the exact same sort of thing at that time. So yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. And so he goes on to, he paints this whole picture of like, if you look at it from our modern lens, with our modern view and understanding of technology, you can see how, which is almost like undoing a lot of what it's like pointing out, I think, the big flaw with his claim, which is like, yes, you only get to these conclusions if you are looking at stuff from our modern lens and not actually. So like, yeah, you can look at these like carvings and paintings and all these writings and stuff and be like, I bet they're talking about space. I bet they're talking about teleportation and like things like lasers and aliens. And it's like, yeah, because you have that modern context for all of those things. It's so wild to me that he like brings that out and he thinks
and in the process, in the process, he's like, also, archaeologists, they suck.
Yeah.
Like, every chance he gets, he's like, fuck archaeologists.
Yeah, these idiots. He basically accuses them of gatekeeping. He's like, what, with their expertise and knowledge, they're the only ones who can make the first two.
Okay.
I thought we were in America, and he basically, the first 2 chapters, he sets down a lot of foundation that you would have to be a real dickhead to try and refute. You know, you'd have to be actually trying to be, but then it's like, he's just like, look, we all agree. Chapter 1 is like, look, we all agree that aliens could probably exist.
Space
and chapter 2 is like, we just there are lots of unknown things in the universe that we don't understand, that science is still trying to figure out. And then chapter 3 is like, and that's why the archaeologists are trying to fucking put arsenic in the water supply.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, wait,
hold on a second. How did we get here?
Back up. That's you jumped up far ahead here.
Yeah. What I love about chapter 2, though, as he's painting this picture of like, this is what a different planet would think if we landed on their stuff, he talks about technology and he mixes like current technology with like stuff that doesn't exist yet in our world.
Yeah,
right.
Like, so he's talking about like, all right, so aliens would see us with our strange heads, and it's just like we're wearing helmets in our spacesuits, and then they'd be confused about how we could make the night turn bright as the sun. So we have flashlights, and then he's like, and then we could effortlessly rise into the air, you know, with our rocket belts that we have.
Right, that was where I saw like, rocket belts. Like, that's the same place for me. I was like, we just got rocket belts. Okay, those will blow your legs right off.
And this is before he starts all this, he's like, these things will be invented in the next 20 years.
Erich von Däniken, libertarian. He's just like, if they have free market, we'll make sure this happens.
It's gonna happen. We all want it to happen.
Human ingenuity. And probably, that's the thing. He's relying on the ingenuity of humans, the curiosity of humans to make the technology to evolve, but he doesn't extend that same courtesy to primitive cultures. He won't, you know, he's saying like, oh, well, those guys, aliens helped them, obviously. We have just got to figure out how to make fucking rocket belts, and that'll be 15 years down the line. You mark my words.
Everyone's gonna be flying around in them. But then he also, in like the next sentence, is like, and then we also fly through the air with helicopters. So it's like we have rocket belts and also helicopters for flying. I don't know why he couldn't think of like a different flying. If we have rocket belts, surely we'd have a different flying vehicle that could than helicopters. But
when were helicopters popularized? Because that emphasis. I wonder if helicopters weren't like top of the line technology at the time.
Yeah, I think you might be right.
When was the first helicopter?
Everyone's furiously Googling helicopters.
Invention date, 1939.
Yeah, no. They were used in World War II and all. So, okay, all right. So that's off.
He must have just thought they were cool, though, I guess.
He just really fucking loves.
They are.
They're
pretty cool.
They're neat. And so we're sort of like leaning, you know, he's doing this idea of like painting a picture of like, now just look at it from our point of view, or like we can look at the past and see that maybe he wrote a line down, and I took a screenshot of it, but I don't know if I can find it because I took a million screenshots.
You got to narrow down the screenshots, Scott.
When he's talking about the carvings and portraits and like all these different visual things that ancient civilizations took down that maybe if you squint, they could look like aliens. He wrote about it and said, I should like to be generous, and I'm willing to postulate that the primitive artists were unskilled and portrayed the figures in this rather crude way because it was the best they could do. That's him being generous, he says.
Yeah, he's being real nice.
He's saying, I'm going to be generous and say these artists just like didn't know how to draw an alien good, you know?
H.R. Giger, they're not, ladies and gents. No. Sorry.
No chiaroscuro shading. Fuck them.
So like it's those like lines that he draws in this sand that are so bonkers to me, where he comes to it. You can tell he comes to this idea with a clear conclusion in his head, and he's like, I'm just going to twist everything until it all makes sense to me. But and that's when we get to chapter 3, which is what I feel like I could talk about for the bulk of this podcast for sure.
And I feel like we kind of have to. It is the bulkiest chapter of the 3, and it's by far the most bonkers. So,
yes.
Yeah.
So as we're reading through the first 2 chapters, pretty much fly by. They're a little dry at times, very mathematical, but you could sort of be on board a little bit with what he's saying. Like, all right, sure. And then we get to chapter 3, which is, I think, like 3 times as long as the other chapters.
Oh, yeah, easily.
Yeah, it's The Improbable World of the Unexplained is what this chapter is called. And it does this thing of throwing everything at you
at once,
all at once.
I felt like I was being conned in a shell game. Erich von Däniken is just some guy who's like, all right, now watch the. He's like, all right, now look at the coin. Here we go. We're gonna watch it. We're gonna slide and we're gonna move this. And I'm like, oh my god. And he's like, Baghdad batteries. And I'm like,
Nazca lines. 5,000-year-old textile, too complex for anyone to do by hand. It's just
so obviously, if you're a longtime listener of this podcast, we've hit on a lot of stuff that this 3rd chapter hits on. We've talked about the Nazca lines and the Baghdad battery and all this stuff. But just to talk about the Nazca lines for a bit, because this is another screenshot that I took, because I cannot believe that not even in the modern audiobook thing, they didn't delete this line. So they're talking about how the Nazca lines, which are these very straight, long stretches of land that sort of look like roads around Peru. Erich von Däniken says that they are like a landing strip for an airplane, right? That's his claim, is like ancient people had access to airplanes or aircraft in some capacity, and they needed an airport or a landing strip or something for these airplanes to land on. He sort of briefly touches on like, well, why haven't we found any planes then? He's like, well, if the plane was made out of metal, it would have corroded over time. And he says, most metals corrode in a few years, but stone never corrodes. Like, sure, stone doesn't rust, but it definitely erodes. Yeah.
You'll excuse me. I have to climb out from behind these stalactites and stalagmites to explain to you that stone stays the same at all times. It never corrodes.
Yeah, I feel like this is around this point. He has the line, and I wrote it down. Why would they do any of this if not for aliens?
I wrote that down too. It's so funny to me that he can't wrap his head around anything. He talks about all of these like big statues and like these big, they are works of art, and he can't wrap his mind around the concept of art.
Why? Why would they do that?
Why would they make these big things? Why would they do something artistic?
Right. It's insane. He goes into like it's the most condescending shotgun blast of alien conspiracy theory, like bird shot of conspiracy theory hitting you all at once. And it's so condescending. And it's like, he talks about this map and he's like, and I looked this map up. I forget what the name of it was, but
the Piri-Reis map. Yeah.
Piri-Reis.
Yes. And he talks about this map and I was like, that's interesting. Let me look that up. A very cool artifact, a very interesting example of old cartography. But the notion that ancient people couldn't figure out how to get a map just so without fucking like that, it's spoiled is what it is. It's
so we've done an episode about the Piri-Reis map, but Erich von Däniken in this book talks about an angle of it that I don't think we discussed on that episode, which is he claims, so just a refresher for everyone, the Piri-Reis map is like this old map that looks like it accurately draws the sort of landscape and coastline of like South America and like Antarctica and things like that, long before we ever knew that we had the ability to map out those locations as accurately. And we sort of debunked that whole thing on a very old episode of this podcast. But we didn't talk about this angle that Eric writes in this book, which is, how did they get that data? It was they went up into the sky and took a photo of it, like a camera photo. And in the most literal sense, because then he talks about, well, how come the edges of the map don't line up really well? Oh, it's because the camera lens that they were using has like spherical distortion the way that like older lenses would. And so it's like, on one hand, you're saying that these older civilizations have these advanced technologies that they can create flying machines, hovering machines even, way back in the day, but they are limited by camera technology of just like, which even today, we don't have alien spacecraft and flying saucers and things, but we do have software that does lens correction. And so it's weird that the aliens wouldn't have lens
Aliens
correction
had no lens
software.
correction. They didn't
can
have Photoshop.
They can hover like a Harrier jet, but the fisheye lens just fucks them up.
They got no fix for that. Yeah,
and they've never figured that out. No,
never.
They're still working with Photoshop version 1.0.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
They didn't want to pay for the Creative Cloud subscription. They thought that was bogus. They're still rocking CS6.
That's the thing with this. When as I read it, you have to wonder about people like Erich von Däniken, where you wonder, like a lot of people in these positions, whether they're con men or they're true believers. And this was around the time that I started, he's a true believer. I have to believe that because it's such a childish way of looking at it.
Yes.
It's like when I first started going camping and stuff like that, and I wanted to have coffee in the morning. So I had to learn how to make coffee on an open fire, how they used to do like way back when, and it's a pain. It's a pain. It's still it's very good coffee, but it's not like a drip, thing that you can program the night before.
Yeah.
It's a royal pain, but it still works. It's still, and it's kind of like a kid going, wait, that's how a kid finding out about dial-up, let's say.
Yeah.
Some kid being like, you had to get on the internet to make, that's really, but I was on, but it worked. It was a pain. It isn't as good as this, but it worked. And that's this notion that people in 1,000 years ago or more, just because they didn't have the ability to fly above the Earth's surface and sketch out an accurate, that they would have just given up and been like, I guess we'll figure it out when we can fly.
Yeah,
that's not how people work.
It's so, there's a lot of stuff like that in here where it's weird where he draws the line on the as advanced as the technology gets. And I think he's purposely vague in a lot of ways too, of just like, was this aliens doing it? Was it the alien technology that they handed off to people? Was it, and I think he's purposely trying to he's like you were saying, he's just the guy asking questions. He doesn't have answers. Yeah. He's just asking questions. I'm just asking questions.
Just asking questions. Yeah. Erich von Däniken, fair and balanced.
Yeah. I mean, it really it totally underestimates the amount of time and boredom there was back then for somebody to just figure something out. Like what was it, Eratosthenes with the stick? Like he had to wait like a whole fucking year to prove that one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
this notion that exactly, that's exactly it.
Like measuring the shadows and the time, and you're like, if the sun is in this position, it's
because he says there's another thing I wrote here, which is he says, who can imagine that human hands and human endeavor excavated, transported, and dressed this big block, talking about some stone statues from the past. It's like, what else were they doing, man?
Yeah, man, they weren't. It was like, well, I would love to excavate this, but the Bold and the Beautiful are on, and it's like, no, man, that's what they were doing.
That's what they were doing.
That's what they were doing. There is something to old people screaming about how, the young bucks nowadays are so busy playing their games and they're distracted so much. There is at least something to it. It's like, we could be moving monoliths. We could be doing that.
Come on.
We shouldn't.
I'm not. I'm not distracted by video games.
You're not.
That's not me. Actually, right now I am. The Zelda game it's got me and it's got me in its hooks.
You're only human.
It's in your talons.
Yeah.
Just another quote that I really, really love, talking about archaeologists. They stick a couple of old pot shards together, search for one or two adjacent cultures, stick a label on the restored find, and hey, presto! Once again, everything fits splendidly into the approved pattern of thought. Like, the man has never been on an archaeological dig in his life. He has no idea.
Well, that's the thing. So he's talking about, if this is the section I remember, he's talking about sort of like what happens when you find something that is like sort of outside of what we know of. And it's like, well, you dig it up, you either slap it onto something that fits, what we already know about that culture, or you say, oh, this is something brand new, and just slap it on the label and be like, nope, this culture had this other idea. And it's like, yeah, dude, like sometimes cultures can have lots of different ideas. Like, and it's because they are a a complex group of people, a complex civilization. And he's
unless they're the Sumerians and they appear out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, that was not all right. This was my favorite part. And not just because he referred to the Semites as semi-barbaric. Oh my God. There's that dog whistle. Holy shit. But yeah, that was my favorite part in this whole section where he's just like, okay, so how do you explain the Sumerians? What do you mean? How do I explain it? They just showed up with all this technology and stuff. It's like, no, they really didn't. They were there figuring it out.
Yeah.
No, they just showed up one day. He does have this fascinating view on how scientists and anthropologists stuff must think of these things. Did his like first girlfriend, his first love, like leave him for an anthropologist or something? And he's just like, fuck it, from now on, they're all assholes.
Yeah.
Like, that's going to be in this book. It's like they're arrogant. They only care about the established order. They got big penises, and that matters for some reason.
No, because he talks about, you're right, because he has this other line. He's like really just like going hard on against archaeologists and anthropologists in this section, as he says the line like, you know, when we're talking about like how do we explain these things that seem like they're inexplicable based on our current level of knowledge, to which like an actual historian or anthropologist or something would say like, well, let's look at the context and let's do some more research and things. But he sort of says like, how can we look at these things inhibited as we are by stubbornness and prejudice? Like he's saying that about the archaeologists, that they are inhibited by stubbornness and prejudice.
They're so prejudiced.
Whereas like he is holding a mirror up to himself right now saying these lines, you know, like it's so weird because no matter what you say to him, he's going to be stubborn about it. And he's going to say, well, actually that was aliens when you think about it, you know?
And there's a moment towards the end of chapter 3 where he goes, theories and intolerably audacious ideas are hushed up or dismissed by killer phrases, as the Americans say. There are many possibilities.
Yes,
it's against the rules. Always a good one. It's not classical enough. Bound to impress. It's too revolutionary. The universities won't go along with that. Others have already tried that. We can't see any sense in it. And that hasn't been proved yet. And that's like, he's like, this is how they shut us down.
Wanting evidence. What the fuck? Like
what I love, and we sort of bounced over this in the earlier chapters, but you know, in these list of rules, he's talking about like, you know, oh, it's too revolutionary. It hasn't been proved yet. He uses the examples to like sort of get people on his side about like, is my way of thinking really that radical? Because when you think about it, people used to think that the earth was flat. And he brings that up a lot. And it's just funny in modern context that the same people
Nothing changes.
Be reading this book would be like, well, clearly Eric doesn't know about how the earth is actually flat.
This is a strange full circle we've come with this kind of, it never changes. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that most science, most truth, is not sexy. It's not mind blowing most of the time. It's just, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And that's and a lot of it also isn't always as conclusive as a person would like for it to be really satisfying. The world isn't like the Da Vinci Code. You know, we can't reach, most times we can't reach just absolute 100% conclusions. We can hit like 98, 99%, but we can't eliminate possibilities. And that's not satisfying to children and Erich von Däniken. You know, they want a hard line, finish line. Get on the finish line. It's aliens. And it's like, no, it's not. The truth is far more banal than that.
It's like, it's probably art.
It's probably art.
But that's not as believable for some reason. I think Erich von Däniken just doesn't understand art. And that's where a lot of his confusion comes from with a lot of the evidence, quote unquote, evidence that he pulls. It's just like ancient cultures making art. And he's like, but who is it for? And it's like, everyone, man. It's for everyone.
I think you nailed it. And it's something that you and Tristan hit on the show all the time, where it comes from these people who tend to be essentially, this is ironic based on the backflips they'll do to back up their theories, but they are essentially very incurious people. There isn't a level of like just really, there's not a lot of thoughtfulness about it. It's like, why would they just do that? Well, it was something to do. Not everything means something, and that can be very confusing sometimes if you're trying to look back. But that's just life, and you don't have Occam's razor, man. You don't need to jump through hoops to make some bizarre conspiracy theory true, just because the answer is boring.
Yeah. And there's so much more just in this chapter that is, because he really just lays it on thick here in a lot of just really baffling ways that I feel like I could talk about really forever.
Yes.
He hits like half the countries in the world. With this stuff. In this chapter.
There's a literal section of the chapter that I thought of as crazy bullet points, where he literally is just like, and this thing, and this thing, and this thing. Oh, and you're just, oh my God. I feel like if we reread this chapter 4 more times, we would get something like not just kind of new, but brand spanking new out of it every single time. It is nuts in there.
Yeah. And just to sort of cap it off, it literally, this chapter ends with what I was talking about near the start, which is a paragraph about him saying, as soon as we look at the past with our present day gaze and use the fantasy of our technological age to fill up the gaps in it, the veils that shroud the darkness begin to lift. Yeah, man, that's the problem. Yeah. You're exactly right, Eric. And that's what makes it not good research.
Yeah.
Oh God, Erich von Däniken looking back on his life and seeing all the wild theories that have been dredged up by his book, and he's basically the guy in the hot dog suit.
So,
I wonder who could have done this.
Yeah, hey, we're all looking for the guy who did this. You know,
it's. He's a great example, I think about conspiracy theorists, and I think of them kind of as fan fiction writers of life. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not a franchise, it's life that they're writing fan fiction for. And sometimes it's entertaining, but mostly it's just cringy.
Yeah. Well, I am very sorry that I had to subject you both to reading the first 3 chapters.
I'm not done. I'm going to finish this. I'm finishing this book. I'm reading this whole thing.
I kind of want to keep going. Make this a series. Would you guys be willing to come back in the future and just keep reading this book with me?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
it's done. It's done.
I want to so bad. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find, if they enjoyed this banter with you two talking about a book? Is there a specific place on the internet where they can hear more of you talking about books?
Oh yeah, you can find us wherever fine podcasts are distributed freely, and that's going to be your Apple Podcasts, your Spotify's, your Google Music's, and YouTube's, and your just put in. You go on a platform that you think has a podcast thing and put in Pixelit. It's probably going to be there. You can also go to our website pixelitpod.com. You can follow us on the wasteland known as Twitter at pixelitpod, on Instagram at pixelitpod, and at our patreon.com/pixelitpod.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll have links to all of that in the description of this episode. Kevin, Phil, thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thank you, Scott.
You can find more of this show over at probsnotaliens.com. That's where you can find links to everything. Thank you to everyone who shares this. Tristan normally has a whole section here about like what we should plug at the end, and I don't have that in front of me. Tristan's not here. This podcast is all jokes and all fun and no structure for Scott right now.
Pure frosting, baby. Pure frosting.
That's right.
We're all frosting.
Just thanks for listening. And until next time, the truth is out there.
Probably.
Oh, yeah, everyone do it probably.
3, 2, probably.
We'll I'll get that in post. That'll be good.
That's for the editors back home. They'll take care of it.
Which is me. I will have to take care of it.